Hello, thank you for joining today's webinar sponsored by Index Engines. Today's topic, we're talking about data management, specifically unstructured data management through classification. The concept here is really looking at gaining better insight into your user data environment so you can make decisions about it, decisions that'll save you money, and more importantly, decisions that'll save you risk. My name is Jim McGann with Index Engines. I will be your presenter today. If you do have questions, on the right side of your screen, you should see a question window. Feel free to type in the questions and we will get to them either during or after the session if we have time, or you can send them direct to me. My email address is on the screen. I'll put it up at the end of the session and we will get back to you directly. Let's get started. Index Engines, we are a software company. We provide information management software, very extensive software. It's purpose-built, high-speed indexing for global distributed data centers, typically, very scalable. Our claim to fame is that we support large petabyte class environments, supporting unstructured data and email. We also support not only the primary storage or primary data sources, but can support data that's in backup formats, like legacy backup tapes, legacy backup disk images, and so on, to be able to support management of that content. Our focus really is to be able to help understand what exists, to be able to find data, manage it, get it where it needs to be, and govern it based on policies. We are located on the East Coast of the US. We are partnered with a number of large organizations, including Dell EMC, Amazon, Ernst Young, FTI, and others. Our partners or our clients include a number of large financial services firms, government or state agencies, health organizations, pharmaceutical companies, a wide range of organizations that really deal with information management challenges across the board. So really the challenges that we see and we hear about every day revolving unstructured data is there's really no knowledge of what exists. When you talk to the IT organization, they really don't feel it's their responsibility. They feel like they are only responsible for increasing storage capacity and making sure that data is available. When you talk to the business users, they don't know what's out there, what has value, what has regulatory preservation requirements, and then what has no value, what we're calling ROT, redundant, obsolete, trivial data, for those not familiar with that term. The data that could easily disappear off the network and no one would miss it at all. So because of the glut and the unknown and the mystery of that data, you really can't support data policies. You know, finding data that has value, finding data that's sensitive, finding data that has no value, different disposition strategies. Some of it could be tiered to the cloud. A lot of organizations may not want to get rid of data or purge data, but the cloud is a great repository in that it is lower cost, it's outside the data center or the primary storage environment, and it's more easily managed or more cost effectively managed. Archiving what needs to be preserved for long-term retention, finding data to support legal compliance if you have some kind of regulatory or legal discovery or e-discovery request, and then supporting regulatory requirements. We're seeing significant interest in our technology really to support things like the General Data Protection Regulation or the GDPR, which is a EU or European-based initiative that impacts companies in the US that do business in the EU. We just did a webinar last week on that, which is available online. So what is the cost of storage? If you ask 10 different people that are in the space here, what is the cost of enterprise storage? You'll probably get 10 different answers. I pulled one from Forrester, a well-known advisory firm or analyst firm in the market. They're saying that for 100 terabytes, the fully loaded cost is almost $1 million. The concept of buying storage is cheap, buying storage is easy, is maybe true if you're looking just the cost per terabyte, but maintaining cost is expensive. You have the data center cost, you have the management cost, you have the cost of data protection for that storage, you have the cost of redundancy, you have the cost, you know, across the board of maintaining it and so on. So it adds up significantly. when you're talking about 100 terabytes, when you're talking about petabytes, when you're talking about multiple petabytes. Index engines really our support for, and we're going to be talking today mostly about data cleanup and understanding what exists, is three aspects. We basically use the tagline of know it, manage it, govern it, is really the three key components to what we do every day with our clients. So knowing it is really around classification, and data classification has been a term that's been around for a while. With this resurgence in some of these regulatory policies and these governance requirements, it's really undergoing a resurgence. So data classification and profiling, kind of the same thing. Really, it's around being able to use our enterprise class indexing software. Indexing is the foundation of the classification capability to be able to index at the scale that we do. And indexing captures metadata, but not only the typical metadata like file name, date, owners, things like that, but it could also go deeper and do full text. So full text is important when you're supporting privacy requirements or regulatory requirements or something like an e-discovery requirements. But beyond full text, we support pattern, regular expression, finding content like that contains PI or personally identifiable information. We also have implemented the concept search. We also can index things like security ACLs, the access logs or activity logs, who has accessed what files. So being able to capture the rich content and metadata that exists out of the network to be able to really do in-depth and comprehensive classification. And then built into the tool also are reporting tools that are very important in that you can really go through iterations and dynamically understand what data looks like from a reporting point of view on user files and emails. And I'll show maybe some examples of that down the road. And then integrated in the platform is defensible disposition. So you can delete, copy, migrate. There's integrated archiving, integrated preservation capabilities, full defensible audit trails and logs of what was done on specific dates, what was done by specific users, mostly administrative users that are really managing the information. So be able to clean data, copy it to other locations if required, or migrate it to tiers like the cloud, for example. And then finally, full automation and monitoring. So these policies that are developed can run on a scheduled basis, can be automated so that data is managed and cleaned and classified on a regular basis, providing a better environment that's not going to get corrupted or clogged down the road. So in terms of classifying data, there's a number of things that can be done. There's a number of organizations where people talk about data mapping. Data mapping has been based on a traditional interview-based approach, talking to the IT organizations and users about the data environment to really glean as much information as you can about what exists and why it exists and so on. What we're talking about is technology-based classification that could really augment and supplement that data mapping process. The ability to classify content into different buckets that would allow you to really determine disposition strategies. So if you've got multiple petabytes of data, which is typical for our clients, having to manage multiple petabytes is complex. If you start classifying it into different buckets and narrowing it down into data that has high value or lower value for the organization, that allow you to develop more targeted disposition strategies. So for example, if we classify data using Active Directory, so Active Directory really allows you to look at data by department because all users are members of Active Directory groups. So for example, client services or HR. So if you say, show me all the data that's owned by HR or human resources out of the network, that's a classification bucket that allows you to make certain decisions about the content. Maybe within the HR, there's certain kinds of documents that are high value or more interesting to the organization, maybe contain valuable intellectual property. Maybe they contain sensitive personal data that needs to be managed. So you can go further and use metadata to filter on that data, the HR data, and say documents that would contain personal information within the HR group would be file types of documents, file types of email, for example. So that takes that bucket and narrows it down even further. And then you can use tagging. We have tagging built into the system, that content for easy access. So by tagging that that universe of data or that bucket of data, which could be dynamically rebuilt and dynamically managed and monitored, you can do full content search on that to look for things like PII or people's names or any kind of keyword search or regular expression search to find sensitive data, for example. One example of how you can use classification kind of to take a large problem that's a petabyte class problem and take it down to maybe hundreds of terabytes, which is easily managed. So we're going to go back to the concept of ROT, redundant, obsolete, trivial content. So you can find different statistics out on the internet from different firms that talk about what percentage of data exists on primary storage network that would be really comprised of ROT. 40% is a common number that you hear. Again, your mileage may vary, your numbers may differ. If it's anywhere from 20% to 60%, it's going to fall somewhere within that range. So by using the classification capabilities that I mentioned earlier, you can go specifically focused on ROT and look for duplicate content. One of the capabilities of index engines is the ability to do a metadata level indexing, but also look at duplicates. And you can look at duplicates by looking at the same file path, same last modification time and owner, or we have the ability to create a document signature using an MD5 algorithm to really look that it is exact duplicate content. So looking for redundant data using a couple different approaches, looking for age data that hasn't been accessed in, say, more than 3 years. Abandoned data, a little bit different from age data. Because we can connect to Active Directory, we can say, look for inactive users or users that don't exist within Active Directory that has not been accessed. So that's data where the owner of the document or the file no longer is with the organization and none of the other employees has access to the document. That's abandoned data. It's stuff that is really not going to be touched in the future at all. Then non-business multimedia data. So that would be iTunes libraries, videos or movie files, vacation photos. That could be considered, data that does not have value. Trivial files, things like log files. We have examples of customers that have found hundreds of terabytes of log files that are sitting on primary storage, being protected and backed up, taking up space. Personal vacation photos, things like that that's out there. So looking at the classification capabilities that I mentioned to kind of profile data or classify data based on these different criteria, you can develop a defensible disposition strategy. So within the Index Engines platform, single click to be able to take this data that's been tagged or classified and migrate that non-active data to the cloud, for example. A lot of our customers are moving data that's costing, could be costing millions of dollars per petabyte to manage on primary storage to the cloud, which could be costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to manage annually. So you're taking the data and moving the footprint off-premise into a remote environment that's just much more cost-effective to manage. If no one's accessing it, no one knows it exists, no one's ever going to touch it in the future, why does it need to sit on primary storage when it could sit in the cloud? Some organizations can delete data. Controversial topic, can you actually purge data? There's a very common topic that's bubbling up these days talking about data minimization. So minimizing storage footprint. So deleting data that no longer has business value, maintaining a full defensible audit trail on that process. And then archiving data that's not active. It may contain personal information. It may contain intellectual property. You may want to archive it off the network into a cloud environment and allow some of your business users to mine that information using maybe even concept search or using some other search algorithms to find old intellectual property that has been lost. It's known as dark data that's been hidden on the network. Number of different disposition strategies that can be done. So the classification for ROT analysis, I mean, if you're looking at being able to clean up to 40% of the data, again, different classification buckets, and we have more information on this on a white paper that we'll offer at the end of the session. Again, in different disposition strategies that could be executed. One of the interesting things that we see here is a lot of these projects, these IT projects, to be able to go and do cleanup are not typically funded. Organizations are happy with maintaining a status quo or a business as usual approach by just increasing storage capacity. Again, those that think storage is cheap. and growing that and providing support to be able to deliver whatever the users need in terms of file capacity. But if you look at this raw cleanup and you can eliminate some of those budgets from increasing storage capacity and clean up some of that, reduce some of that data center costs, you can fund these efforts and these activities very easily. And we have some ROI or TCO calculators that can help you prove this out to your management in order to get funding for these projects. Here's an example. This is actually an example done through some reporting tools. This is not specifically the index engine's interface, but it's some reporting tools where the data or the output of index engines was used to be able to create these charts and graphs. So very visual view, which is something that's really lacking in the enterprise storage environment, is to what exists out there. So looking at this view, you can look at capacity by department. So here you can say, break it down by different departments, and Index Engines captures this by looking at Active Directory membership. So based on the Active Directory membership, here you can see that the HR department is using in this particular server environment about 28% of the capacity of the server, about 1,400 terabytes or a little over a petabyte, number of files in the billion, 70 billion. And an interesting exercise that organizations go through is they don't really know how many files exist out there. And we usually ask them when we begin these audits that we partner with them on, is they'll say, oh, there's probably a couple of million, maybe 10 million files. And those tens of millions turn into billions very quickly. So they get pretty shocked there. Looking at abandoned data, as I mentioned, stuff that's owned by ex-employees based on Active Directory. So you can find abandoned data and then break it down into what was accessed in the past year versus abandoned data that has not been accessed in greater than a year. So if it's owned by an ex-employee, but other users are accessing it, there's value in that content. So that's different from the stuff that nobody's accessing. Email audit, find the number of PSTs. A lot of our customers are very concerned about PSTs that are sitting out on the network. Which departments have a lot of PSTs out there? You can even drill down into that and say who specifically owns them, when have they been accessed, and so on. Active data, data that's last accessed in the last year or greater than a year, and then kind of looking at ROT analysis. And again, these reports are all customizable. So these are sample reports that were created. Your reports would be wildly different or more detailed or more general than this. But looking at ROT analysis, you can look at redundant content by department, obsolete content by last accessed, and you can see the bulk of the data has not been accessed in more than 3 years. Trivial files based on file types like logs, videos, photos, and so on. Again, reports, the output of these reports could be delivered to things like Tableau or other reporting tools on a weekly or daily basis, so you can get time-based series of this content. So in terms of analyzing and classifying, typically looking for data of value, active data and dark data. Active data being stuff that users are using, dark data, stuff that has value that no one knows exists. Maybe old research data. We have clients that are looking at old engineering documents, other clients that are looking at old statistical or research data that exists out there, finding that content and leveraging it, and making sure it's available to those that need it. Finding age and redundant data that's outlets business value, migrate it to cheaper storage, save money and clean that up. That's something that you can really present to senior management saying, we were able to reclaim this storage capacity and show you the cost savings of this project and this effort. Finding sensitive data, that's difficult to put a hard dollar cost on. It's kind of a soft cost in terms of finding and preserving or securing sensitive data that maybe contains PII, especially with some of these new privacy acts, right to be forgotten, the GDPR regulation, and so on. Finding PSTs that are out there. We've had customers where we've had administrative personnel creating PSTs, and some of the executive teams that have been sitting on the network just lost and no one knows they exist, containing a lot of sensitive email and sensitive content, contracts, things like that. Migrate that stuff out to an archive for long-term preservation, allowing organizations to search on it and kind of determine what to do with that content. So in terms of classification, when you start going down and looking at data that exists on the network, you'll find significantly, and some of these numbers are based on customer projects that we've been involved with, It's widely different. I mean, I've talked to a number of industry analysts about publishing these kind of numbers, and it really depends on whether you're a pharmaceutical company or a manufacturing company or a healthcare organization. The numbers vary widely, so it gets very complex. But the amount of redundant data out of the network, I usually hear 30-35% is a common number, so 20 to 40% makes sense. Age data, 10 to 20% can be aged. We've had customers where those numbers were wildly different, much larger. Abandoned data, 18 to 22%. Stuff that contains personal sensitive content. Again, that's different depending on what department. You know, for an HR department, a lot of their data would be very sensitive. For a operations department, probably less. Personal multimedia, again, could be wildly different. And then data of value, active data. If you look at the petabytes of storage that could exist, or even just common user shares, a 100 terabyte server and so on, 20 to 40% is stuff that's real active, stuff that has data of value. So the challenge is separating the wheat from the chaff, finding the stuff that really has value, that's keeping the business running, versus the stuff that really has aged out and is just really clogging the networks. The stuff that really doesn't have any value, that could disappear tomorrow and no one would notice, is significantly larger than the stuff that does have value. Here's another example of a report, again, a report that was generated using third-party tools. This is a departmental drill down report looking at different organizations that are out there, like operations, HR, and so on. So looking at data that was last accessed. So here they're looking at, where's the stuff of value, the stuff that people are really using, that they've been accessing over the past year. And we all know that as data ages, it really loses value, or even if it does have value, users really lose sight of it, and it becomes, just lost in the ether. Location of data, if you're kind of looking at the different servers, where is the manufacturing organizations, where are most of their data stored? And again, when I talked about data mapping earlier, this is kind of great insight for data mapping, very detailed, factual-based information based on metadata analysis. Data types, what kind of data exists out there. Documents containing PII, you can see for different departments, like in the finance department, obviously a lot more documents containing PII, things like social security numbers, credit card numbers, things like that. And then location of the PII files, where are they? So here you can see beyond just doing high-level metadata, we're getting deeper and deeper into the content of the data. And some of the new conceptual search capabilities that have been added to the system allow you to train the search engine and the reporting engine to say, find me documents that look like this, that look like contracts, that look like agreements that are sensitive, that's something I really want to learn where it is so I can manage it effectively. And then within the Index Engines platform, fully defensible disposition built right in. So not only is it a search and reporting tool, but you can act on the data. It's a fully actionable platform that, based on the profile of data or the classification of the content, you can migrate to cloud storage, basically data with little or no value. Deletion, if you can execute a defensible deletion strategy, getting rid of the redundant data owned by ex-employees, for example. Archiving data, preserve data that has sensitive content. Index Engines has a built-in archiving capability that can take advantage of object storage like the cloud. Encryption, there's no built-in encryption within Index Engines, but there's an output that you can get full file listing and path and location of these types of files and leverage third-party encryption tools. And then disposition of things like personal multimedia, stuff like that that's really personal content that shouldn't be on the network. You can use Index Engines to notify management. You can find users by department and say, these users are storing this data specifically out there that really needs to be cleaned up and removed from the network. So all migrations are logged. So defensible audit trail. So a lot of organizations want to create these active logs that say, on this date, this content was migrated out or even deleted or purged. Here's a listing of the files that were purged. And if you're going back and doing some kind of audit, that information of those logs are available. Another important point is if you leave it to some IT organizations, they'll use migration tools that are cheap and easy on the network. And what they do is, as they migrate data, they'll strip out owners and they'll strip out last access dates or certain dates. Index Engines, when it migrates data, makes sure that all the metadata remains intact, allowing it for a very defensible process. Some of the other features that we've added to the system as well beyond the classification is the ability to do security assessments. So things like the GDPR really kind of mandate strict notifications and potential fines for data breaches. I know the news is covered today with this month's data breach, pretty big one that's causing executives and CEOs of that organization to step down or retire early, as they call it. Those are kind of things that these regulatory organizations are looking at to put stricter rules in place. So what Index Engines provides is a number of abilities really to perform security assessments on the content. Again, I mentioned earlier that we index activity logs to determine who has access to certain files, and things like ACLs or access control logs to determine who has read-write browse permission. So for example, you can use the classification tools to say, these are all the sensitive type files that are created. Maybe it's Excel spreadsheets in the members of the finance department. So then you can do a report that says, show me all users that are not members of the finance department that have access to these finance spreadsheets, and get reports on that and determine, is there some people that have access to this stuff that really shouldn't get access to this stuff? It allows you to proactively clean up sensitive data so it doesn't breach the firewall, really kind of protect more from an internal point of view against rogue employees or bad actors that may exist, and proactively access the sensitive content and manage it. So a lot of this data where you have a data breach or some data where it's been attacked, it may be data that has sensitive content that really has not been accessed in ages. So you can kind of clean that up, get it out of the primary storage and secure it in these archives. So there's a number of assessment or security tools that are built into the product that will help customers or help end users really kind of protect against any kind of this risk or liability. Some of the sample metadata reports, I'm not going to go into detail on this. I think the white paper has some of this information in it. But going back to the ROT classifications, some of the tools looking for redundant data here, you can look at data and classify duplicate files owned by ex-employees, duplicate files not accessed in 3 years, duplicate files owned by members of specific departments and not accessed in more than X years, and kind of put business value on it. So the value is extremely low, low, very low, and then tag the specific disposition strategies according to the value based on the classification. Again, outdated data, basically looking at it, and you can't really put a classification on it across the board, but data that hasn't been accessed in more than 3 years, it's very low if it's, say, the shipping organization or whatever it's called internally. But for HR, it's very high. They want to keep those records over 3 years. So you can have different disposition strategies, like for HR, archive it, or the shipping organization, delete it, again, for trivial files. So you can get an idea of some of the flexibility in the tool that you can go very granular based on the classifications and develop different disposition strategies that really suit your business needs. And then looking at more governance-related classifications, looking for data of value. So maybe contracts owned by the legal department, which would be looking at file types, which would be equal to Word or WordPerfect or PDF, for example, and Active Directory membership legal department, extremely high value. So if those files are not actively being used, maybe you want to archive and preserve that content. Data, for example, looking for personally identifiable information, email containing credit card numbers. So looking at file type equal email, it could be exchange, it could be notes, and so on. And then looking for patterns like credit card number, social security number. That stuff could be migrated to encrypted archive, for example. So you can see there's a lot of flexible options and reporting options that are built into the system, as well as disposition options that can occur. So I'm wrapping up here. I know we're trying to keep this to 30 minutes today, so I may not have time for questions, but if you do type them in, they'll be logged and we'll get back to you. But in terms of Index Engines, a little bit of an introduction to the platform was the goal today. The ability to know what you have, provide insight into the data, manage it based on your policies and requirements, and govern it, taking control to support regulatory requirements and legal and risk requirements. So in terms of knowing it, it really is the only solution on the market today that supports petabyte class indexing, reporting, and integrated disposition across both your primary network data as well as legacy backup data. We do also have an assurance program, very valuable. So if you're not in the position to have your IT organization execute one of these classification or indexing solutions, we have a services, combination software and services solution where all that needs to happen is Index Engines has access to a server, remote access to the server. Index Engines will install the software, get it up and running in 90 days with it, and allow it running for 90 days. We'll install and configure, we'll train you on the product if necessary, deliver all these reports that I showed you earlier in classification, and collaborate with you on a disposition strategy. Very inexpensive, starts at a little under $9,000 for 25 terabytes, goes up to 50, 100, and 250 terabyte bundles. And we found that this is very good for organizations that kind of want to kick the tires on this approach, but do not have the resources to implement the technology. This is kind of a hands-off approach that allows Index Engines experts and engineers to implement the technology and handhold you through the process and deliver the results in a very short period of time at a very cost-effective price point. We also have obviously the software that can be installed and run inside your firewall by your organization, where we can train you on the solution as well. Again, I'm going a little long. We do have this white paper that goes into a lot more detail on the solution, our ebook for data classification. Again, my email address is on the screen. Shoot me an email. I'll get a copy of the slide deck if you like, as well as this ebook out to you. We've recorded today's session, so I'll send you that link as well. If you contact me, our website's there. Take a look at it again, and we can discuss further your needs and answer any questions that you may have. Again, I know I was a little bit over our 30-minute time frame, but I think it was a good use of time, and I really appreciate your attendance. Again, look forward to speaking with you. Reach out, and I will shoot you a copy of this ebook later this afternoon. Thanks for attending. Enjoy the rest of the day, and we will speak soon.